Morning and welcome to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and so glad that you're here with us. Well, yesterday was the safe harbor day for the electors, but the election is far from final. Now, I was able to interview the Attorney General of Texas to talk about what he is planning and what he's brought forth to the Supreme Court. My piece I co-authored with John Solomon, our founder, and looking at what he's doing in filing a lawsuit. This was filed on Monday evening directly to the Supreme Court, challenging the election results in four states, the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And what he's alleging is that those four states made Constitution to election rules without the legislative consent, and this is in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution says that it is the legislature that will make the time and place set for elections. And so his argument here is one that he's gone directly to the Supreme Court, and the reason he's gone directly to the Supreme Court is because he says that it's the only place he can go, because he is making this lawsuit and these allegations against other states. Well, where are you going to go if you're at this high level, state to state? The federal government and the federal court in this case can be the only place, he thinks and argues, that can provide some form of relief. Now, we're going to break up his interview a bit, and let's listen to this first clip and talk about it on the other side.
So I think it's really important that the rights of Texas citizens, that their vote counts. And so if other states are not following state law and allowing ballots to be mailed in and then not verified, it affects the outcome of the election potentially, and could easily have done that. We'll never know for sure, because you can't go back and verify these signatures on the mail-in ballots if they didn't follow their process. So my concern is, if that is happening in other states and they're not following state law as it relates to electing electors for the federal race, then it affects the rights of Texans, and their vote doesn't mean anything anymore. So I'm worried about the credibility of elections, not just right now, but I'm worried about the credibility of elections going forward.
And there you hear him. He's saying that this is about his own people in Texas who would have their vote because their electoral votes have been recorded for President Trump. He's worried that they would be diluted or invalidated or disenfranchised because of what these other four states are doing. But on this issue of disenfranchisement, we dug into that a bit more. Let's take a listen to that clip as well.
I'm saying people potentially are disenfranchised because if we have millions of fraudulent ballots, which is completely possible, because the procedures were not followed to verify that the signatures were the people actually, allowed to vote. So it's very likely we've got millions of disenfranchised voters across the country, especially those, were disenfranchised by who are legitimately voting. We already, I think, have that. So, I'd say the argument goes the other way.
So when he's saying so I'd asked him, he said the argument goes the other way, because I'd asked him about this argument that you hear from supporters of Joe Biden, that if Paxton is successful with Texas, that he would be then disenfranchising people in four states. And he's making the argument, he's flipping it on its head and saying that his people in Texas and other people in other states will be disenfranchised. And in fact, we just heard a statement from Arkansas, where the Arkansas Attorney General put out a statement on Twitter, and we've put that up, and she said that AG Rutledge will legally support the Texas motion. Arkansans and Americans across the country have real concerns about the lack of integrity in our federal elections this year. After reviewing the motion filed by Texas in the U.S. Supreme Court, I have determined that I will support the motion by the state of Texas in all legally appropriate manners. The integrity of our elections is a critical part of our nation, and it must be upheld. And so this is the first state that we've seen come on board with Texas. Obviously, we're going to keep tracking and see if there are other states who are going to follow suit here. The time crunch certainly is of essence, though. And when I spoke with Attorney General Paxton, I asked him if he'd spoken to other states and heard from other additional supporters. He said not at this point, although he is going to be flying to D.C. He's about to board a plane there in Texas, and he is going to be flying here to D.C. And he said he expects that he will likely be meeting with some other attorneys generals while he's here in Washington. He already, according to his office, had pre-scheduled a lunch meeting with the president at the White House that was going to be separate from this election. But obviously, we can expect that the president is going to be talking about this with the Attorney General of Texas. And Attorney General Paxton has said that process here. He's hopeful. He thinks that he will be proven correct. Let's hear that clip.
There's a lot of factors that could have had an impact on which way the election went. And I would think whether you're a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter, you care about credible elections going forward, because it's not just one election we're talking about. We've got, other elections going, that are not, national elections that are affected by this, but we also have future elections that are going to be affected by this. And so the process and making sure that we get this right really matters. Whatever the determination is on who's president is, in some sense, secondary to getting the process right for the future.
Now, it's important to note that we'll put the headline up here that in Pennsylvania, there is a congressman from Pennsylvania who put a request to the Supreme Court for emergency relief to decertify or block the certification in the state, and he was rejected by the Supreme Court. It was a one-page, one-paragraph decision, and last night on Twitter, the justice who was leading this, his name, Justice Alito, was trending on Twitter. The application for injunctive relief on the matter is denied. The decision will leave in place a ruling from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that had earlier rejected the argument, which had claimed that the state's present mail-in voting system put in place in 2019 was unconstitutional and that most of the state's mail-in votes were thus void. Now, this is an interesting argument because this has to do with something that happened in 2019, and the arguments from Ken Paxton, a lot of them are resting on things that happened because of COVID, to say that a lot of these changes happened without legislative approval during the age of COVID, that a lot of them were hasty and they happened without, according to the Constitution, those who have the power to run the elections, the legislature, did not make these changes. It's important to note, though, that the emergency injunctive relief is what was rejected here, the desire for a rapid decision here from the Supreme Court. But this is a separate issue. We will, of course, keep you posted on everything that's happening on the Texas front, hoping to have the AG himself on set with us tomorrow. But in the meantime, stay with us. We are going to have more on the election and President Trump on his vaccine, the FDA approving emergency authorization for the Pfizer vaccine. We're going to break that all down here after the break. Stay with us. back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield, and glad you're with us. Now let's do a little bit more with my interview with Attorney General Ken Paxton from Texas. He has filed a lawsuit directly to the Supreme Court challenging the election results in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And he said his argument here has one to do not with fraud, but one about the Constitution. Let's take a listen.
I'm not making a fraud argument. I'm making an argument based on the Constitution and what we know happened, which was that we know state law was changed by people other than the state legislature, which is the only constitutionally authorized changes that are allowed. So we know that law was violated. My argument is that the law was violated, the Constitution was violated. I'm not addressing whether there was, 2 million fraudulent ballots cast in Pennsylvania. I don't know. And there's no way to know. The way the system got set up, the way the rules got changed, supposedly because of COVID, we can't even know. We can't know if any of these ballots are legitimate. They did it in a way so that you could almost never go back and check it.
Now, you can hear that the Attorney General there, he's saying that his argument has to do with the Constitution and not with questions of fraud. There's really a two-track argument that the Trump legal team and his supporters have been making. Some, especially Sidney Powell, have been looking at this question of fraud, and a lot of those arguments have been unsuccessful in court. And Attorney General Paxton says that he thinks that even though there is some case law, we've spoken about this with legal experts who say this concept of stare decisis, which is the fancy way of saying that case law or previous courts have said that this word, the legislature, has been more exclusive or expansive to include other bodies who can make decisions on behalf of the legislature. Ken Paxton says, no, hold your horses. This is all just getting way out of hand, that it truly is the legislature, that the Constitution says what it means when it says legislature is going to be controlling the elections. We'll see if he's successful. Meantime, let's go over to Atlanta, where we have been reporting. My colleague Daniel Payne has been looking at in Atlanta. There are still more questions about the early dismissal of Atlanta poll workers who are alleging there was secret ballot counting. Now, this is based on news reports, but also affidavits of people who said they were sent home early. State officials, they dispute this. They say that there was these suitcases or these plastic bins or whatever you want to call them, the ballots that were found on camera, they said they had already been counted. They said that this was much ado about nothing. And obviously, we here at Just the News and at Real America's Voice, we're going to keep you posted on the truth about all this. I also want to talk to you about my latest piece at justthenews.com, looking at this question of illegal votes that have been cast by immigrants. Now, these are immigrants who are non-citizens. Some of these immigrants are illegal immigrants, and some are legal. They're here maybe with the green card, or they're here, but they're not citizens. I looked at really a growing body of research. Institutions even like Harvard, they've partnered with the for-profit entity called YouGov to look at just how widespread and how common it is for people who are non-citizens to go out and vote. Now, that is illegal. If you are not a citizen, you could be sent home. You could face fines. You could face a lot of penalties if you are voting and you're not a citizen. And yet in some states, there have been reports that, for example, if you go to get a driver's license or some other form of interaction with the state, that you then will automatically get your ballot or your voter registration sent to you, even if you're not a citizen. So there don't seem to be controls that are uniform to make sure that non-citizens are not voting. And I spoke to Ken Paxton about this, and also Congressman Mo Brooks, who says he plans to challenge the Electoral College in January. Both of them said that this could have had a real impact on the outcome of the election. In the piece, also, if you go online, I cited a 2014 research paper by some professors, including the current chair of the Department of Political Science at the University of South Dakota. And what they found was that the 2008 election could very well have been influenced by illegal votes by people who are here either legally or illegally, but they're not citizens. That they said it could have very well affected the Electoral College in 2008 and could have very well affected who actually went to Congress after the 2008 election. So really, really heavy stuff here. And President Trump actually made the argument, according to the Associated Press, in 2017, in January, right after he won, despite all the media naysayers in 2016. The president said that he actually thinks he would have won the popular vote if illegal immigrants or illegal ballots from non-citizen immigrants had not been included. He said that it was between 3 to 5 million ballots that should not have been cast by people who were not citizens, and he actually thinks that that would have made the difference for him with the popular vote. And then we saw after that he set up a task force with Vice President Pence to look into this more, but they didn't really come up with any results. So even though they've identified this as a problem, for his part, unfortunately, he didn't actually do anything about it. Now, I want to move to Mitt Romney, who has been making some noise about Republican colleagues, folks like Mo Brooks and possibly others who say they plan to protest the Electoral College. Mitt Romney has been a vocal critic of Donald Trump, despite reportedly meeting with the president to discuss becoming Secretary of State. And he also happily took his endorsement when he was running for Senate. But then he turned around and voted to impeach the man who had endorsed him. And he said that people who protest the Electoral College, he said this whole process would be madness. He said that we have a process, recounts are appropriate, going to the court is apropos, and pursuing every legal avenue is appropriate, but trying to get electors not to do what the people voted to do is madness. And no mention about whether he thought it was madness when Democrats did the same thing. Democrats challenged the electors in 2001, in 2005, and 2017. I don't remember Mitt Romney saying anything about it then. So it'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen on January 6th. Now, in other news from the White House, President Trump signed an executive order ensuring that Americans are going to get the coronavirus vaccine ahead of foreigners. And the FDA is expected to authorize the emergency use of the Pfizer vaccine very quickly. And we know that the president has a quick turnaround time. Once that happens, the Operation Warp Speed logistics chain, they've been meeting. They've got the distribution pods all ready to go so that people can get this vaccine ASAP. Now, I want to move also to the issue of social media and censorship and antitrust issues. The federal government and also some state officials are expected to file a antitrust lawsuit against Facebook. More than 40 U.S. attorneys generals and the U.S. government are preparing to file antitrust lawsuits against Facebook. They are alleging that the tech giants have engaged in unlawful and anti-competitive tactics to buy or kill off its rivals and to solidify its dominance in social networking. Now, this will be very interesting to see if this gets filed here in the Trump administration, and if it does become a Biden administration, this is something that the Biden administration would be inheriting. And what's also interesting is that this is something that we're also seeing at the state level, so it's supposed to fit both a federal and a state issue. There seems to be wide support for going after Facebook in this way. We'll see if anything comes of it, but it's something that it could be a gift, if you will, from the Trump administration to a possible Biden administration to see if this goes through. Stay with us. We've got Carol Swain coming up after the break. there. Good morning and welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield and so glad that you are with us. I want to bring in my good friend Carol Swain. She is host of Be the People podcast. But first I want to set it up and play a clip from one of her recent episodes that I found very interesting. Take a look.
You know, Carol, one of the first things after I landed in this country as an immigrant, as a student, a very poor student with no money, but with an opportunity and freedom in America, I heard this expression someone told me that stayed in my memory for the last 30-some years. He said, you know what America is about? It's about freedom and liberty and mutual respect. It's about sheer humanity on the spaceship Earth. We can work together, respect each other. I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to my death your right to say it.
Well, that is the way it used to be in America, I believe. And recently we've seen something that many people would consider, and I consider, the rise of socialism. And we see our nation being torn apart, and America no longer looks like America. It probably is beginning to look more like the China you fled.
Yes.
And Carol Swain joins me now. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. So, Carol, your guest there, his analogy was very interesting to say that this is becoming a lot more like his homeland of China, and to say that, you know, the mantra here used to be that I might not agree with you, but I will fight to the death to give you that right to say something I disagree with. I was really struck as I heard him talking about here in D.C., just how normalized it was that businesses were boarded up before the election in anticipation if President Trump had a definitive, immediate outcome that he was victorious right off the bat being declared. The people were planning to commit violence in the street, and that these businesses, it had just become reflexive for them that this is something that we're just going to look the other way because there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, Carrie, it makes me so angry how the Democrats used Antifa and Black Lives Matter. We went with months of protests, violent protests, and then when they realized that it was hurting them in the polls, they just turned it off. Just like you might turn off a television set, they turned it off. They had this election where I say they stole the election. As far as I'm concerned, Donald J. Trump won by a landslide, and what is taking place today is people are afraid. And I think that one reason why voter fraud is not being investigated the way it should be and election irregularities is that out there looming, everyone knows that Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they are waiting. So if a decision were made in favor of the American people and Donald Trump, we know that they would unleash those people upon the American public. I don't think that's a reason for us not to do the right thing when it comes to this election. I believe that if they unleash those forces on our nation again, that President Trump and his Department of Justice will be able to take care of it this time. And they need to do that. And I think one reason President Trump picked up so much support all over the country was because of what Antifa and Black Lives Matter, what they were doing in the streets. And they're waiting to do it again. They would do the same thing with the Biden administration. Because they've not been held accountable, they would do it again and again and again. It has to stop. Lawlessness has no place in America.
Well, and Carol, I want to get your thoughts because we've been seeing a spike in crime across the country. An organization called the Council on Criminal Justice found that homicide rates have increased by 42% during the summer and 34% in the fall over the summer compared to 2019. There's another crime expert who found a 30% increase in homicide throughout the year so far compared to 2019. And this is in 51 major U.S. cities. And this is coming even as people are calling and crying for defunding the police. So we're seeing a rise in homicides and violent crime at the very moment people want to defund the police. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, Thomas Hobbes wrote about what happens when you have a state of nature where there is no law. And our Constitution, is the basis for the rule of law in America. If you remove the police, of course, you're going to have an increase in crime and people are going to try to protect themselves. But the only thing The only people who have benefited from the coronavirus changes have been prisoners who were released from prison, who are out there committing more crimes. And this social justice, Marxist, socialist movement, what they have done is turn everything upside down. The criminals have the upper hand. Meanwhile, citizens like us, if we go out without our mask, if we don't follow, the edicts of Big Brother, we may find ourselves arrested. The police are arresting citizens when they ought to be out there hunting down the criminals, putting them in jail, and keeping them there, regardless of who they are.
And when it comes to the victims of crime, this is what the tension is, that the people who are going to be suffering because of this spike in crime, their voices are not being heard. This is something that we've heard over and over. And if these victims are speaking up, in many cases, many of them are minority, that the victim of someone who is the most likely to be a victim of a violent crime in an inner city is a minority. And yet you have folks who are accusing people who want to make sure the police are funded are racist. Why is this happening?
Well, it's happening because we have racial double standards. And the suffering of people of color, that suffering is being used to advance a radical progressive agenda. And you started off the show with the clip of my interview with Ming Wang. And that interview is part of a new YouTube channel that I've set up called Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. So I hope some of your viewers will subscribe to the Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. But these double standards that have taken place, they're totally unacceptable. And now that the country is moving towards being majority minority, white people are not necessarily the majority all over the country, it's more important than ever before that we have a system of fairness. And we cannot allow, violence to take place and police to be defunded and for people to hold back when it comes to fighting for our voting rights, when it comes to enforcing our laws, when it comes to protecting our citizens. There's a reason why Donald Trump improved his numbers among minorities, getting 18% of the black male vote. It's because he was out there speaking truth. And so I really urge your viewers and the people, that are in their influence networks to do something about this election. Put pressure on your lawmakers. We cannot allow the 2020 election to be stolen. We cannot allow that to happen, this lawlessness. It hurts everyone. It hurts racial and ethnic minorities. It hurts our nation as a whole, and it destroys a lot of beliefs that people have had about our country. And think about all those poll workers, all those people that volunteered their time to participate in this election. And when they got to the polling places, they were not allowed to do their job. When they raised objections, nothing happened. And we're watching nothing happen right now.
Carol, I want to ask you real quick in just a few seconds. Do you think that the increase among minorities for Trump has to do with Trump the man, or do you think this has more to do, is it going to expand beyond Trump the man?
It depends on what Republicans do at this moment. Right now, a lot of times when I hear people talking about the election fraud, the voter fraud, I don't see as many racial and ethnic minorities. It's happening in our communities. Right. We need to be leading it.
We got to leave it right there. Thank you, Carol. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. folks. Welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield, and glad you're with us. Let's talk about China. Joining me here is Gordon Chang. He's an expert on all things China, and he's author of the book called The Coming Collapse of China. Good morning, Gordon.
Good morning, Carrie.
So I want to get right into this news. It just seems something out of a movie or a spy novel, but reportedly a Chinese spy worked as a fundraiser for Congressman Eric Swalwell. Now, Eric also ran for president in the Democratic primary this go-round, and reportedly he had an intimate relationship with a woman named Christine Fang, who helped raise money for him. And it turns out she is a spy. She is part of a Chinese political intelligence operation. And there have just been lots of red flags going up about this. And the congressman has said that, she left the country in 2015. He hasn't been in contact with her for years, for half a decade at this point. Should we believe him?
Well, Christine Fang has left the U.S. She apparently left abruptly, which is an indication that she was working with Chinese intelligence. And it was not just Eric Swalwell she was in contact with. She was in contact with about 3 or 4 other members of Congress and a couple of Midwestern mayors. Apparently, she's had sexual relationships with. China's intelligence operations in the U.S. are massive. They're directed against both parties. And really what we have got to do is have a national conversation about how we end this. And this very well may be something we need to start closing more Chinese consulates, because Christine Fang was actually working with and out of the San Francisco consulate of China.
And when we're talking, over and over we've heard when President Trump has referred to the coronavirus as the China virus or the Wuhan virus, he's immediately thrown to the wolves by the media. The media likes to say that this is racist, that it's xenophobic, that he's anti-immigrant. Do you think that if we're moving to close embassies or consulates, what's your response to people who say, well, that's xenophobic?
Well, the consulates have been involved in activities which are incompatible with their status in the U.S. Not only have they been involved in intelligence operations, they've also been involved in inciting violence in the U.S. The Houston consulate was closed, I think, because there's a Radio Free Asia report that an intelligence unit of the Chinese military actually based themselves in the Houston consulate. And from there, they used artificial intelligence and big data to identify Americans likely to participate in Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests. And then the Chinese military sent them videos via TikTok on how to riot. This is more than just subversion. This is an attempt to overthrow the government of the U.S. Now, we have seen other activities like this in other Chinese consulates. So whether people think it's xenophobic or not, it's actually a defense of the United States.
So do you think that, we have incoming, media outlets have called it for Biden. If we have an incoming Biden administration, do you think that this, move to shut down consulates will continue?
I don't think so. But on the other hand, we got to remember that going forward, it's probably not the Biden administration that's going to be driving relations with China. It's going to be China driving relations, engaging in activities which are just completely unacceptable to the American people. So what I'm talking about is we've seen these massive Chinese intelligence operations against the U.S. The FBI, CIA are completely overwhelmed. So the only way that we can deal with this is to start closing China's operations in the U.S. to make it more difficult for China to spy. I don't know if the Biden administration would do it. I suspect they wouldn't. But nonetheless, I believe that we Americans, this is our country, need to put the pressure on our elected leaders to defend us. And clearly right now, China is just completely overtaxing our ability to go after their spying operations.
We just heard that Pete Buttigieg is on Biden's shortlist for ambassador to China. What's your read on how he would engage with China?
Well, the ambassador, in a sense, is not really that important because China policy is not made by the ambassador in Beijing. It's made back in Washington. I don't know if Buttigieg knows very much about China. He didn't talk about China very much during the campaign. So, I think that essentially this is not a good choice because normally you want someone with a familiarity with the country. Now, anybody can learn. And the most important thing is what a person thinks about the country and has the attitude which is necessary to defend our republic. And that is, I can think of other better candidates, basically.
And real quick, earlier I spoke to you at CPAC a lifetime ago, it seems, in February, and you said you thought that this could be the Chernobyl moment for China. Your analogy was talking about Chernobyl with ushering the end and the collapse of the USSR. And do you think that this is coming to pass? Do you think this is a Chernobyl moment for China? Or do you think it's actually, it looks like in some respects, it's actually strengthening China?
Well, in February during CPAC, there was a lot of resentment and anger that was expressed by the Chinese people. Right now, we don't hear that because the Communist Party has imposed an extraordinary information control campaign. So it doesn't look like Chernobyl now. But you got to remember, Chernobyl was, 1986, and the Soviet Union fell at the end of 91. So it takes a little time. But I do think that what it has done is it's changed the nature of the relationship between the Chinese people and the Communist Party.
All right, we're going to keep an eye on all of this. And Gordon Chang, we appreciate you breaking this down for us.
Oh, thank you so much, Carrie.
And make sure to check out his book, The Coming Collapse of China. And follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. And stay with us, folks. We have our very own Real America's Voice contributor, Tom Borelli, here to talk about his thoughts on the election and what's going to happen next with the Supreme Court. Stay with us. We will be right back. there. Good morning and welcome back here to Just the News AM. I'm glad you're here with us. We have one of our own, Real America's Voice contributor, Tom Borelli, with us this morning to break down the latest on what's happening with the electoral battlefield here. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Carrie, thanks for having me.
So, Tom, we've been reporting here about Ken Paxton and what he's doing out of Texas. The Attorney General there has filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court. However, we had the same news also on Pennsylvania that the Supreme Court rejected their lawsuit trying to decertify. What do you think the chances are here that the Texas Attorney General, he's arguing that 4 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia should be devalidated. What do you think the chances are, given that we know that this loss happened in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think Mr. Paxton and the state of Texas really have a brilliant strategy, because their strategy really goes to the heart of the Constitution. You know, the other side, Mr. Giuliani and others are trying to, prove fraud, and the opponents always can nitpick, and it gives the judge an out. Because let's face it, one of the biggest challenges we have is that judges are making the decision, and we're living in such a politicized time and polarizing time that even if you were to make the correct decision, you're going to have protesters outside your door. So the easy thing to do is pass the buck. But there is no buck to pass after the Supreme Court. And that's why I like Mr. Paxton's effort here, because it really goes to the heart of the Constitution. He's saying that his constituents in the state of Texas are being ripped off because these other states changed the rules in the middle of the game, but they don't have the power to change the rules because it wasn't from their state legislatures. It was from elected officials, and that's clearly unconstitutional. So from my perspective, this is really kind of a black-white issue. And it, again, because it's states fighting against states, it goes right to the Supreme Court. And for justices to make the decision, it really does have to be, I think, a black and white case. And I think Mr. Paxton actually has that here.
But in Pennsylvania, like I mentioned, the Supreme Court, they wouldn't even go through and do more than a page. It was just a one-sentence rejection of the injunctive relief. They were seeking to decertify the results in Pennsylvania. This is a congressman from Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court couldn't even be bothered to do more than one sentence to say, nope, we are not going to look at this.
Well, that is just one case, and again, but the Texas one is state versus state. It's a much bigger issue for going forward with the United States. And also, my understanding of the decision yesterday on Pennsylvania was more of a punt. They didn't just throw it out; they kind of tabled it. I mean, that's my understanding. But I think the clear case that Mr. Paxton is bringing, again, it's a black and white issue. Do other states have the right to change the rules in the middle of the game without their state legislatures? That's a clear shot. I think it's a very clarifying case. I think it's something really important that really goes to the heart of the Supreme Court, because it is a constitutional issue.
Well, and yes, you make a good point there that this rejection of Pennsylvania yesterday by the Supreme Court, you're right, it wasn't rejecting the case per se. It was just saying we're not going to expedite and give you the, expeditious, injunction, immediate relief that you were seeking, but you could still pursue it. So they did say that. That's an important point, Tom. I want to point out that in Arkansas, the Attorney General just put out a statement. She said that Arkansas is going to support legally this effort by Ken Paxton to block the results in these 4 states. And she says that after reviewing the motion filed by Texas in the U.S. Supreme Court, I have determined that I will support the motion by the state of Texas in all legally appropriate manners. The integrity of our elections is a critical part of our nation, and it must be upheld. And you're right. What's interesting, I find, from this and also from speaking to the Attorney General Paxton himself, I asked him, are you worried that you might be disenfranchising people if you're able to block these results in 4 states? And he said, my concern is the people of Texas and making sure they are not disenfranchised. If we see this other states like Arkansas joining on with this lawsuit with Texas, do you think it will just ultimately come down to kind of just this scrum where you have states who are scrimmaging with others? I mean, this would be very political from a Supreme Court standpoint. And we know that the justice, the Chief Justice has said over and over he wants to depoliticize the court.
good luck with that. Not in 2020. Everything is politicized to the nth degree here. But again, I think the more states that join Texas, it just shows just how powerful this argument is. And I think it makes it more able for these justices really to make the right decision, because we know politics has entered, unfortunately, into the Supreme Court. Look, Justice Roberts, he saved Obamacare. I believe he switched his decision midstream. There's rumors about him that he's worried about the way the Supreme Court would be viewed, his court. Well, that's nonsense. His job is really to rule by the Constitution. That's why you're there. If you don't like that job, if you don't like the responsibility, get the hell out and get somebody else in there who will stand up for the Constitution. And that's what the American people want. But again, I think the more states that join in with Texas shows this isn't just a single issue. They are really concerned that they did the elections right. Florida did the elections right. Georgia, right next to them, somehow couldn't. What's up with that? Texas did it right. A huge state. They were able to do it, but other states like Michigan were not able to. Pennsylvania were not able to. We know Pennsylvania, they made the change that you're able to count votes after Election Day. That was a decision by people within the state, not the state legislatures. This is now chaos, and this is the way the Democrats like it, by the way, because they know they can win in chaos. They can't win by law and order, and they can't win by the Constitution.
All right, Tom Borelli, thank you for joining us here on Just the Museum.
Thank you.
And stay with us. We will be right back. You don't want to miss what's coming up next. Hey there, welcome back to Just the News AM. Well, I hope this warms your heart here as we close the show. The greatest generation, it was the veterans who defended our country here and defeated the Nazis and defeated Japan that was wanting to crush human freedom. The greatest generation, we're finally finding a new way to give back to them and honor them through an organization that is creating a mission called Operation September Freedom. And it's named after the month in 1945 when Japan surrendered in World War II. And what this is they are giving World War II veterans free rides aboard the iconic Stearman biplanes. And I think we've got some footage to put up so you can take a look and see these veterans. You can see them smiling and just having the greatest time of their lives. They're allowed to go up for about 20 minutes, soaring to 1,000 feet into the air. And these planes are just here to honor these veterans. And they had to suspend the flights, sadly, this year due to COVID, but they are now starting to find veterans. They said it's going to take several months to canvass the country to find them, and they want to make sure, obviously, because this is a very vulnerable group within the elderly population who's at risk for COVID. Hopefully, with the coronavirus vaccine coming out, these veterans will be able to resume their dream flights. Word on the street is that these veterans just really, it's a throwback for them in how they were able to really defend the honor of this country and our freedom, and we are so grateful to them. That does it for us. Stay tuned. Don't want to miss War Room coming up next.